I don't know what the crapshoot is to get to live longer. Maybe we are looking at the wrong thing.
Richard, Saul, welcome. Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Brandstetter, founder and podcast producer of Max Podcasting. And you can email me at max@maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. This is episode 254, and today's guest is the legendary Richard Saul Wurman. Richard is the creator of the TED Conference, the TED Med Conference, the EG Conference, the WWW Conference. The list goes on and on and on. He is also the author of 90 books in a wide range of categories, and he is a designer and an architect. And at the time of this recording, he is 88 years old and is one of the most brilliant minds you'll ever hear from. In this episode, we talk the most thrilling and thought-provoking insights and stories from Richard's lifetime, how to get better at listening, how to get better at asking questions, and as you will hear very shortly, this interview is different than any other interview I've ever done before. So sit back, relax, and let Wurman take you to another place. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with one of the brightest minds or brains, or he would probably tell you least interesting people on the planet, but endlessly fascinating, Richard Saul Wurman. Richard, really excited to speak to you. How you doing today?
Oh, I have to start by commenting on that's a stupid question because it can't be answered. And it shows lack of respect because it's not narrow enough question to answer. If I told you how I'm doing mentally, the parts of my body, my attitude, my energy, any different, it really doesn't want to get information from the person. It makes the person give in back to you a vacuous, sort of sloppy, gooey answer. I'm doing fine, or something like that. And so I don't think that's a good question. This little conversation we're going to have, we'll start off with trying to give you a lesson on how to ask questions, as opposed to me answering questions. Asking a question is so much more difficult than answering one. So I met somebody last night I had never met before, and he kept on, because he had found out the number of books and conferences and what I had done that came out in this conversation. And he kept on being amazed. How do you get it done? Where do you get the staff? Of course, you had a lot of staff, because I kept on saying, I don't do much, that I'm not busy. He said, I don't want to take too much of your time. I said, too much of my time? Well, I'll be dead at too much of my time. That's called too much of your time. It's death. No, you're not taking too much of my time. How did you do all these projects? You must have a lot of staff. They do all the research. The research is really, I said, you have it so wrong. A project is about the questions you ask and the brilliance of the question, or the simplicity or the clarity of the question. You can get it answered. You can get things answered when you can't get it answered. The question becomes more profound. Here's a question we couldn't get answered. It becomes a more profound question when it doesn't work. It's the absolute opposite of answering a question. We go through school with putting up our hands, answering questions all the time, taking a test, answering questions all the time. It's completely backwards. The test should be, what would you say are 10 good questions about this subject? Not the teacher giving them. They got them in their education school, not their learning school. They didn't go to a school that taught them how to help people learn. They went to a school to help them get their credentials for the following year as a teacher. And then they got recredited as a teacher to make people memorize things, to preset questions that are in their teaching books. And the students never learn how to ask a question. Classically, our life goes in the early years is we're pushed away from the sink by a parent who says, if you ask me one more question, I'm going to send you upstairs. Questions are discouraged. And Socrates, who didn't write anything, so I'm not referring to anything you read that he wrote, but was written about, was known for, in my words, which are just paraphrased, not clever words, that a good question is better than a brilliant answer. It's the question, stupid. It's not the answer. Because a really good question, it's Einstein asking the question of realizing that something didn't exist, and he asked the question so he could try to solve it. It wasn't his answer. It was the question. His curiosity is a question. It's implicit in a creative person that all they are is a bunch of questions. I'm 5'7" of questions. I'm 5'7" of that. That's all I'm made up of. I'm not made up of protoplasm and answers. Anyway, that's my opening comment to your little question.
You're the first guest that's ever acknowledged that as a question, and it's not even planned as a question. It's a, you know.
See, if it's not a question, then you're insulting me by throwing in a throwaway line.
So now that I've insulted you, I do have something burning in my brain, and this is a quote that your wife has said about you, which is, "Richard wishes he was a brain in a jar." Why does she say that?
I guess I don't go swimming with her every day that she does. She's very disciplined. I'm undisciplined. You could, if you wanted to stretch it, say I'm very disciplined because I'm thinking all the time and that's my discipline. But it's not a discipline. It's just it's a life. I have a life, not a discipline. And that I care more about questioning everything I see than making chatter, being nice, abrasive, changing the subject to something that occurred to me. I guess I'm more interested in exercising that part of my body. And therefore, yeah, I guess I'd rather be, not really, but it's a funny joke. I'd rather be a brain in a jar than he doesn't care about his body as much, you know. I mean, we are just our brain. If our memory goes, I mean, that's the tragedy of dementia and Alzheimer's, is your dimension go. Well, are you there then? Are you really a human being, or whatever we want to call this temporary species we are? And it's a temporary species. We more and more, it seems like daily, but it's probably weekly, somebody discovering or making up some approximation or some discovery of another humanoid type race that existed someplace else on the earth 240 years ago, even after the last ice age. But that long ago rather than 100,000, they say.
It's a key point that you bring up, and I alluded to before our conversation, that you are, I'll call it, the opposite of the youngest guest we've had on the Wild Business Growth podcast. And I think
I'm 88 years old. I'll be 89 in March. Now, when you're 89, you're actually in your 90th year, because when you're born, you're in your first year. You're not zero. You're not in your 0 year. I just turned 0. I was born. No. You're in your first year. When you're 1 year old, you're in your second year. See? We have it a year off. Everything we do is slightly wrong. So when I'm next March 26th, when I'm 89, I'm in my 90th year. And I'll have my first celebration several times during my 90th year of my 90th birthday.
what would your ideal 90th birthday party or 89th birthday party, however you look at it, look like?
You know, my birthday party next year? Oh. I've had different, it'll probably be, some Kentucky Fried Chicken with my wife. I don't think it'll be anything. I did a big 75th birthday party. I celebrated it all year. I was giving lots of speeches when I was 75. So I said, instead of saying no to most people, I mean, even then I said yes to everybody. But they had two things. They had to have a happy birthday cake and sing me happy birthday during the whole year. Then I got tired of it and I stopped doing it. It got to be annoying. But I made a egomaniacal effort to try to have my birthday celebrated. And then I saw it was foolish. So I learned a lot about being an asshole, really. My 80th birthday, I had a really good birthday. My wife is tired of that birthday party, even from 75, or even celebrating birthdays, because we have 6 grandchildren and several children, obviously, to get 6 grandchildren. And there was too many birthdays, and she likes to send birthday presents, birthday cards. I hate birthday cards and all of that. I just, so she went to New York and had dinner with 2 of our kids from when I was 80. And I invited Yo-Yo Ma and Frank Gehry and Moshe Safdie and John Kamen to Newport. And I got a huge space. And a very good vintner, a friend of mine, sent me some fantastic wine. And I didn't announce it, but I chatted different times about a month, during the month before I said I was going to do this. So about, I guess, 30, 40 people walked in to the space. There was nothing on the door. And I said, if you want to come, fine. But if you don't get there by 6, the door is locked and I will not open it. And the night before, I thought of what the theme would be of these people. I didn't tell them what to do. And I just said, get there. So Moshe left a day early from the Emirates, and Yo-Yo came up after a concert at Carnegie Hall, and Frank chartered an airplane and came from the West Coast. I don't know if you know who these people are. Do you know who Frank Gehry is?
I know who Yo-Yo Ma is. The other ones I'm not as familiar with, so I'm reverse aging myself there.
Frank Gehry did Disney Hall. Do you know Disney Hall, the museum, the Symphony Hall in
Okay.
He's the most famous architect in the world. He did Bilbao. In business, there's something called the Bilbao effect, wherein a fantastic building changes the whole city's culture. That building changed Bilbao, and it's called the Bilbao effect.
That's like when you Google Bilbao, that's the building that comes up.
Well, when people go to Bilbao and the businesses open in Bilbao, it's because Bilbao now has a reputation of a cultural city because of a building. Okay? You can look up Bilbao effect. You can check out me. I'm not going to lie anytime in this thing. I have no reason to. Moshe Safdie, you know the building in Singapore with the swimming pool on the roof?
Yeah.
Well, Moshe did that building. Okay. And John Kamen owns Radical Media. He did Fog of War. He has a lot of, where he does some documentaries. He does some amazing graphic things and work with Esri and myself on the Urban Observatory project. And he's a close friend. And he has a major office, a media office. I'm close to them. So they got there. And the night before, I said to myself, I was walking in one of my gardens. I designed a lot of gardens in my house. I had 8 acres house around my house, and I had many, many elaborate gardens in Newport. I lived in one of them. They called them cottages, but it was a mansion. It was the Firestone estate. And I had swimming pools. I had 3 swimming pools that I had built, and these gardens. So it was a hydrangea garden then. I made it into a rose garden, I think, later. Anyway, I was walking in the garden. And I said, what are we going to talk about? How do I start it? I love beginnings. Beginnings are important. Your beginning was not very important.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I thought of the word eat, E-A-T, because the evening was going to end with a great dinner of fish that was just bought from a market by the best fish house in Newport, of a friend of mine, having it just, all of it just out, and like a cornucopia of stuff, things you normally can't get, some really rare, amazing fish and seafood. And a few of us, the speakers, and if people decided to come, they weren't invited, but some people decided to walk from where we were talking, the block and a half to the restaurant. Well, they could come in, there was enough, but I didn't make it. There was not an invitation, and I was not gracious. So I said, well, we're going to drink this amazing wine for about an hour. And then for 90 minutes, we're going to get, it was a huge, huge space. It used to be the old place where the generators were in Newport. Got turned into a place that had 6 wooden boats being built, a school of building wooden boats. and learning how to build boats. And it had three huge aisles, not with columns, one big space, but three parts. And on either side were probably about four boats, being wooden boats. And it was a long and near year. All they did for their 1 year in going to this class was to build a boat the way it was built 150 years ago out of wood. And in the middle was the steaming of wood and the taking of wood planks and steaming them into shape so they could build holes. I said, you've already done that, get rid of that. So we had that whole big middle space of it. Build me a 1.5 foot high plinth, about 12 feet high, and we'll climb up on there and sit in these 5 chairs from my office. I took in, I'm sitting in one now, and we'll have a conversation for 90 minutes. And then we'll go to this restaurant. So I thought the theme would be eat, but it stood for envy, admiration, and terror. And my question was to these overachievers, all of them overachievers, who I've known for a long time, who were friends of mine, not acquaintances. If you look up Gary, you'll see who he is. You'll be shocked. If you know who Yo-Yo is. If you look up Moshe, if you look up John, you'll see they're quite astonishing people, each in their fields. I said, how do you now? Well, Frank is older than I am. I'm 88. He's 94 now. So this is a number of years ago, 8 years ago. So he was 86. I said, how do you think about these words? Admiration, about envy. What did you think of? Are you more envious now of people? Because these are competitive guys to get any place. You admire people more or less now that you're who you are. And are you still terrified? The simplest of questions, but very pointed questions. And we just chatted and joked with each other. I had it filmed. I've never released the films, but they're terrific films. High-def films from 3 cameras. Nothing else was done. Then we walked over and, well, at the end of it, Yo-Yo, that I specifically asked him not to do, did. And he had brought his cello, and because I didn't want to make a performance out of it. And he brought his cello and he played a piece. And then he sang to me happy birthday, and he played another piece for some people, which was quite astonishing. He's done that for different times. He's come to my meetings. And he's an amazing, extraordinary human being. And that was it. So that was 8 years ago. 85th, I don't think I did anything. I think after that, I sort of said, no, I'll wait. So I'm waiting. And then the 90th, I hope, if I'm obviously it's based on life, and I'm planning it now. And it won't be on my birthday. If my plan goes through, it won't be on my birthday. And my wife doesn't know about it, so she doesn't watch this kind of thing, so don't worry about it. And she might not ever know about it because it might not happen. I might not be able to pull it off. But right now I'm planning to do it at another conference that somebody runs that I think has the potential to receive it, and it's in the right state, because I want to connect it with a large project that I'm also don't know if it's going to happen, that I'm working on now in the state of Massachusetts. And it'll involve, if it works, the entire Massachusetts educational system. And I'll celebrate my birthday at his meeting. And the initiative that I'm trying to start is called Saul. I like acronyms, so it's based on my middle name. You know, I have acronyms of how you organize information and acronyms of innovation. There's only 5 ways of innovating. There's only 5 ways of innovation, 5 ways of organizing information. And there's Saul is this four-part thing that I want to start as an initiative and celebrate it at this event. I think, unless I come up with a better idea.
There's always opportunity for that. What does it mean to you? What struck you about being 88 at the time of this recording and still being mentally sharp and coming up with whatever your next ideas are?
I don't know what the crapshoot is to get to live longer. maybe we are looking at the wrong thing. I like opposites very much. I speak about it a lot. I live it. I think it. You say something, I think of the opposite. Is the opposite interesting? A considerable number of scientific breakthroughs and inventions come from doing the opposite of what's going on, not making a better version of something. The electric car has been done. It's not the opposite of the cars driven by gasoline. It's not really a great invention. The very first car was electric 120 years ago. People look at it as innovation. It's just making a better version of something. I don't give it much credit. They will come out with the opposite somehow, an opposite where you somehow don't burn things and either pollute the atmosphere or make some countries rich. That just is, you get from one place to another. It might be hydrogen. H2O. There's a lot of hydrogen around. In our air and all the water is hydrogen. And after you use its energy up, it turns into water. That's the way it uses its energy up by. We've ever seen an experiment where they make water by putting some hydrogen and oxygen together. There's a little explosion. There's one in the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. That's the opposite, Self-explodes by being exposed to what's here. There's no refinery. There's a lot of helium around. The Germans stopped making the Zeppelins, the Zeppelin company, after, of course, the big explosion of the one in New Jersey. But they wanted to use helium and not hydrogen for it. They get blamed all the time. I don't like the Germans at that time, but this is not rah-rah for the Nazi party. I have nothing against the Germans now. I love traveling in Germany. I didn't go to Germany for a long time, but then when I started going, I realized it's an amazing country. And the people there are amazing. But they wanted to use helium, and we wouldn't sell it to them because the war was going on. I mean, the beginnings of the war. And by us not selling them our helium, they turned to something that is more efficient, but so much more dangerous. They knew the danger of it, the explosive danger of it. There seemed to be some ways of getting around that explosive danger. But whatever people use by and large is not always, but by and large is open. Gasoline is open to explode and burn. We see it in enough cops and robbers movies and car crashes. It's a volatile thing. So it could be controlled better too. And then there's their ideas of the generation of electricity to have vehicles that hover above the ground, certainly trains in a contained space. Well, cars might be in a contained space, slightly contained. So you get, you experiment that cars can become more like kind of mathematics where you can never get the answer. You don't quite get to the answer, but you get very close to where you want to go. But you've never touched anything and there's no possibility for accidents and you go very fast. There's things that I won't see, but there's certainly there will not be iPhones. There will be something else besides iPhones in your life. And when you hold your iPhone today or the equivalent, you say, well, I'm addicted to it. I can't get rid of it. I'll always have a horse. I'm always going to have a horse. What's going to be, you say there's going to be another way of transportation? No. I mean, we got great horses and I have a stable full of horses and they get me here and there pretty fast. Everything you know goes away. Everything you think can't go away will. Where's your fax machine? I had a fax machine. I depended on my fax machine. I could only run my conferences in remote places because I had a fax machine. I ran a conference in Japan from New York. I mean, put it together. And I don't speak Japanese. It was faxing. I faxed things all day. They had good translators of it. They sent me back faxes in English all night. I wrote them back my answers. They worked through them, and I got faxes the next day. We put together a complex conference. It was only the fourth conference I did in the TED series was Ted Kobe, only the fourth. And it was only done. I took a few trips to Japan, but it was basically the daily nitty gritty of a complex conference for 700 people, 450 people from Japan in a city I had never been to, Kobe, with people I had never met. 450 Japanese, 250 Americans who had to get over there. And I was running it. And I had one person helping me. I never had a big staff. I never had a staff. The current TED conference has about 250 people working there. I had one person, maybe one and a half, helping me because I decided you can decide. Let's say, well, we have to have food at the breaks and we need lunches and dinners. Well, what are we going to serve at lunch or what are we going to have at the breaks? So somebody says, well, I'll do that job. So they work hard seeing what they can get. And they work out 5 or 6 different things they can do because they know they're going to have to run them past me and how much they cost. And so they do all that work, they get prices, they bring them to me. I pick one of them and I make a few changes in it. Then they go back and they do that and we work that out. Well, I could have just chosen the things I wanted and got it done, period. One phone call. I would know the price. I could bargain them down. I could get it. Took less time, no money, and no more of my time because I still had to review everything. There is so much of doing a project that you think is complex. It gives fear to people. I chose the music that was going to come over. I chose the furniture. It's just a choice. It doesn't matter if it's the absolute best choice. It's my best choice, and the conference was for me. I had to please me. I have standards. My standards I'll put up against anybody in the room, and I certainly will put them against anybody I hire. So there's 90%, 95% of the things are just decisions that you make. 5% is some grunt work, which takes place mostly at the conference. And some keeping track at home of who's coming, the numbers of people, and printing out badges. And I designed a complete opposite badge. I had a long badge on a string around your neck. Well, if everybody has that. But I had their last name large, not their first name, because I care about people's last names. And I didn't want anybody to call me Richard. So I had the last name large so you could pick out, oh, there's somebody I want to meet. I don't want to meet Richard. Who's Richard? There's 1,000 Richards. Or there were, whatever name you want to put, max. And I had the schedule of the first 2 days on the front. Then you just turned it over and it was printed backwards, upside down. And you could do this and see the schedule the next 2 days. So you had a schedule and your name and a number so I could see who you were and look you up if I needed to look up somebody. And it worked. And now they put the last name, no schedule, a first name, no schedule. They're the stupidest badges. Well, I don't know why people don't steal ideas. You didn't have to carry a program around. I did do a program and I had enough so everybody had one, but there was a stack of more if you lost yours. And that program had good bios in it with a picture of the people. So I didn't give introductions. I said, you can read you know who's next. You can read about them. You don't want to read about them, don't read about them. And the longer the introduction that I would have to give, the less I thought of the person. Let me give you an example. One conference over the 4 days, 3 of the days. The first day, I said, our next speaker is Bill Gates. He came up. The second day, it was quite crowded, and the most famous businessman at that time in America sat next to the president's wife at the State of the Union speech, was John Sculley, who was head of Apple. He was very famous then. We forget that because of Steve Jobs, but he was really well known. He couldn't find a seat. I didn't save seats for speakers or for anybody who paid for a meal. I didn't take money from people there was no sponsors that gave me money. They could give me services. They could set up a coffee shop. They could have a pay for a dinner. He was sitting on the aisle, and I just said, John, come on down. The next day, somebody was sitting in the front row, and I said, Q, come up. And I said, Q, before you talk, let me tell this story and why you're last. Because the more famous you are, the shorter the introduction. We had Bill Gates, full name, John Sculley, first name, and you, the first initial of your last name. And that's true.
There's a thread that's consistent across your life, and it involves TED and even involves chemical compounds you alluded to, like H2O, and that's acronyms. What's this gravitational pull that acronyms have on you?
Well, nobody's ever asked me that question. That's a good question. And it's a very simple answer. There's several stories I'll tell around it. I said it to you, I think, on the phone the other day. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I've always tried to have people who were smarter than me that I was around, because I'm not so smart. I'm curious, but I'm not smart. This answers several questions you might ask. When I went to the University of Pennsylvania when I was 18, same age you graduate high school usually, and for a number of reasons, I chose to go into the School of Architecture. My family, none of them had gone to college. One side of this family are cigar makers, and the other side of the family, not owners, cigar makers, and the other side were kosher butchers. I went to school the first day to register from high school. And I got a catalog, and I got a sheet of paper. Then there was no computers. Of course, this was 1953, okay, 1953. There was one of those things that had many sheets and some carbon paper before that you wrote on and typed up, and that's the way things were done and how you got copies, right? And so I was given, my name was on it and the courses I was going to take. And there was a line to see a class advisor. Now, I was really anticipating the magic of going to university is one of those moments in life. Well, for many people, it's not just a trivial moment. It's different than going to high school from junior high school. And that's a moment too. But going the leap from high school to college, when you're not living at home, you're not with people you know, is a bigger leap. And I was asking a lot of it. Also at that time, and for a while, and maybe even some ways now, I was odd. I wore white pants that were about 6 inches above my ankles, boots. I had a grubby beard, but a grubby beard. Nobody had any beards at that time in 53, except hippies. There wasn't even hippies. There wasn't even beatniks. This was before any of that. This is before beatniks, right? This goes back before people dropped out a bit. I was fairly cocky and nihilistic. Anyway, I saw this thing that I had to stand in line, hate lines. And I went into the dean's office. And I said, I'd like to see the dean. And he was an untouchable. He immediately didn't like me. I didn't like him. When I met him, I didn't meet him for a long time. I sat there an hour and a half before his secretary would allow me in. And secretaries are usually like who they work for. So I went in to see him. He had a starched collar and a suit, very, very proper Boston Brahmin. This was in Philly. G. Holmes Perkins was his name. And he managed to put together, however, the best school of architecture in the United States for about close to a decade. It was clearly the best one. Then it fell off, but he put it together with him in a very orderly way. He got his ideas from Gropius, who was head of the Bauhaus in Germany, came over to Harvard and ran Harvard. And he worked for Gropius and then got the deanship there. I guess these are all names you don't know, but some of the people listening know. You could look them up. I said, I have this piece of paper, and I was absolutely crazed by it. I said, why do I have to sign this piece of paper when you've already told me what I'm taking? You could just give me that and say, show up. There's no action that is taken with this piece of paper. And I hate to start my learning experience for the next 5 years. It was a 5-year undergraduate course then, doing something that's irrational. That's how crazy I was, right? He looked at me like, I was like off of Planet 9 or something. He said, well, this is the way we do it, Mr. Wurman. Sign that and go to your class advisor. I said, no, I want to make a deal with you, Dean. He thought I was just crazy. It was a school that was hard to get into. Everybody wanted to get into. It was the best school. And here this kid is a pain in the ass and cocky. I said, I had a chance because I was waiting in line to go through this catalog, and I felt like a pig in shit. There were so many things that were interesting to me. I like to make a deal. I will take every course I have to take for architecture. You have requirements all the way through. Different ones, different years. Less requirements in the upper years. I'll take every single thing I have to take. But I don't want to see another advisor. I want to automatically, whatever I have to take, I'm taking. But I want to take as many other courses that I want to take in any department of the university, which is the whole catalog of the university, as long as I keep a B plus, A minus average. He said, fine, get out of here. Because he knew I was going to flunk out. The first year, they flunked 50% of my class. It was very hard. It wasn't hard for me. So I took a triple load. I went to school every day, every night through Saturday, and not on Sunday. Here comes the answer to your question. I also realized that I was taking all these courses. I was in class all the time. And nights, I went to the night program. When you go to a class, you take notes. Why? The object of taking notes is to study from them for the test, which I thought was absurd, instead of the question. I talked about this earlier. So I took it upon myself to learn to listen and not take notes. I had no notes, didn't take notes. I learned to listen and make connections in my head for what I wanted to remember, because all the stuff somebody says is nothing you want to remember. I don't have a photographic memory, but I could see the words. I taught myself to see. So there's a thing that is called that you can have, where you can see things that people say. So I see things, not like some of the great masters of doing that, but I can see when you say something, and when I say things, I can see them as well as hear them. So I use two of my abilities instead of just hearing, I can see and hear, and put them together. And I make connections in my mind between words and other subjects so I can remember them. And I realized how important that memory was. So I learned to listen, which was my memory, didn't take notes, and I gave myself over to just sucking it in, of just learning, and I improved my memory. So I remember things, not a photographic memory. I remember in a different way. I don't remember because of photographic memory. I remember I have an attachment to things. Everything attaches other subjects, funny, strange subjects in other fields to it. And of course, that's what my TED conference was based on, that moment. TED is about everything.
How does that tie to whenever you're deciding the next project that you're going to, focus 24/7 on?
That's also not a bad question. I don't know how, I can't answer that.
I'm just shooting for not bad.
No, that's a good question, but I don't I have some low times when I'm not as busy. I think of myself being slothful. I told you I worked for two people. I got fired from several other jobs because I couldn't work for people. They didn't fire me. They were really inspirations in my life. Lou Kahn in particular. Well, both Lou Kahn more so than Charlie because I was with him more. But we both became connected as more than just an acquaintance, as a friendship. I did the first book ever on Louis Kahn. I was 26 years old. And he's the architect's architect. Look up Louis, Louis, Kahn. You'll see what's said about him. Kahn. You'd be surprised. There's certain things I was curious about. And then I looked for how to find out about it. For instance, this is not the beginning, so it's the first one I can think of that's very clear, and then I'll go backwards. When I was 45, my architectural practice went belly up. I decided to get out of Philadelphia for a little while and just clear my lungs because I didn't know what I was going to do next. I called up a couple of people. They gave me a visiting professorship at USC and one at UCLA. So I was in LA, and I had this connection to the West Coast for a semester or so as a visiting professor. So Charlie again, I went to work for Charlie Eames for a while. And then came back to Philadelphia. It was a very troubled time in my life, but I was doing different things. I was working for Charlie Eames. I was working for two universities, teaching two different things in each university. Then I came back to Philadelphia and I became deputy director of housing and community development. I did a city job for a year. And then somebody asked me to come out and be dean of a school. I was dean of a school. I was fired from that. That's another whole interesting story. Rehired at a higher salary, and they fired the person who fired me. But I moved into LA because that was out in Pomona. I lived in Claremont. When I came to LA, I was introduced to a vast city where you had to drive. I hadn't driven that much living in Philadelphia. I had a car, but I just walked around the city. I lived in downtown. I lived at Penn. My car, I didn't use it much. In LA, if you need a piece of gum, you have to drive a mile. And I wanted to get a good guidebook, and I couldn't. I couldn't get a guidebook so I could understand where I was. Understanding my context is important to me, always has been. I get anxious if I really want to know the place. I did a guidebook. And I started a guidebook company. Not as easy as those two sentences. I had to get somebody to give me, I don't know, $100,000 to do it, who I didn't know. A company I didn't know was Atlantic Richfield. Arco became Arco. And they became my patron in a while, and they underwrote a Olympic guide. They saw how good the city guide was. And I started, though, this city guide, which eventually turned into Access Press. And the former CEO of CBS became my partner, and I did 22 guidebooks to cities around the world: London, Paris, Rome, all across the United States, and the Olympics and sports and medicine. I saw there were so many things in medicine that I didn't understand, so I did a medical access, and then I did a healthcare book, and then I had a relationship with Johnson & Johnson and United Healthcare and AARP because of older people. And that's how it went. It was just things that took me to my interests. So the next thing is always the last three books I did, one just came out. I mean, one was somebody came to me and asked me, could they do a Kickstarter on the first book I did for Lou Kahn? I said, the first book I did, I was 26. Well, it was a terrific book. And I say that not because it's mine. I look at it like somebody else did it. I can't imagine doing it. So, but I didn't have to do it. It's going to be a facsimile. And it was Lou's favorite book. I said, I'll do it if I can, instead of your like reader's guide you do for it. And it was a package of $100 book or $200 book, because it was a linen book with gold stamping and beautiful reproductions. I said, I'd like to do an accompanying book called A Profound Scrapbook of all the detritus of Lou's life in a scrapbook of my design. So we did that. It turned out very well. That was the last book. Before that, I did a book because I got thinking about being old, 80s, and I got thinking about death, and I realized I didn't know about death. So I did a book called Mortality. And it was all about death. This is where you live the longest. how long you lived, how you died at different places, how they got rid of bodies, where do you live to be 100, jokes about death, the film, something from Monty Python about death. I got a chance to draw a skull, which I'd been doing some watercolors of things. At that time, it had a big art exhibit there. A whole museum did art exhibit of 47 of my paintings and 25 of my bronzes. So I do that along with the other things was interesting. So I did a nice painting for the book. So what do I do next? It's all about different things. And then the book before that was a kind of culmination of my thoughts, is that I saw that I was ranting about the word education and saying we learn. But before learning, what becomes before learning is understanding. And that all my friends, whether it's a cello player or a graphic designer, or an architect, or a business person, or a techie, or a medical person, I knew them. And I had a band of brothers from TED, and they all had a different story of how they go about understanding. Some did it visually, verbally, numerically, a combination of both of those things. Some were storytellers, some had images. The breakthrough that Francis Crick, Watson and Crick. Have you heard of Watson and Crick?
Yeah, of course.
Well, Crick was somebody I know. I have a picture of Crick right here, and I did. That's something else. I mean, Francis was a marvelous man, and one of his breakthroughs with Watson was seeing that photograph. Brilliant professor at Cambridge. I taught at Cambridge, by the way. I taught a lot, so Cambridge was one of the highlights. And he saw a double helix. And so it became visual. He built a model. The breakthrough of DNA was building a model. It was visual. He understood because of a visualization, not a formula, not C equals MC squared. It was a formula that he let him bigger Tinker Toys. Basically, he had Tinker Toys, and he could show how things connected in Tinker Toys. That was an amazing breakthrough, but that was a way of understanding through a model. People have a different journey. So I did a book called Understanding. And it's one of my best books. I have 5 books that are okay. Out of 100. I'm a 5%er. And then I learned, after I did the book, there was a book I should have done before, Understand. I learned for myself that before you understand, you have to learn how to explain. That it's really explaining, then understanding, and then you can take action. So I'm working on some project called Explaining. What is the science of explaining something? And there's a methodology of explaining things. Just not read more books. And that there is a relationship that at the higher level, the top person in a siloed medical school, because that's what our universities are. They don't talk to each other. It's a group of siloed specialties. A university was put together with the idea initially that everybody would talk to each other, would be a better center for learning. Because we couldn't fit them all in one building. We'd have different buildings, but they talk to each other and learn from each other. And eventually, like one of my granddaughters did, put 2 departments together at the age of 15. She graduated high school at 15. When she went to see the top guy at Carnegie Mellon and said, I want to take 2 of your disciplines, put them together. And she created a department there at 15 and was the first graduate, called computational biology. Now, that's logical that the biology department and the computation department should be together, because that's all the way it's done. And eventually there'll be other departments put together, and it might become a university. Uni means one city. A city is great because it has all these disciplines together and you get everything done. But that's not where the university is. It's a series of silos that don't talk to each other, that raise their own money, have their own buildings, named all differently, have different number of years, different rules of how you get through, different ways you get promoted, all kinds of politics between things. So I'm interested in the base course of really the science of being able to explain. Because explaining something is where it begins. If I figure out how to by working very hard, a person, chip a flint, whether it's a piece of flint or a piece of obsidian. Do you know what obsidian is?
I'm blanking. Isn't it like a dark rock?
Well, it's volcanic glass. It is
Yeah.
black.
All right. I'm close.
Well, it's not a rock. You're half wrong.
Half empty, half full. Depends how you look at it.
Or the right size glass. There's a third alternative. Well, you have to explain how to do that. It's not easy to make a flint or to chip something. It truly isn't. I lived in the jungle of Guatemala for 6 months, and I mapped in the jungle where there was no roads, no doctor, no communications, no phones, no electricity, no running water. Terrible conditions, 12 of us. And I was part of a group of 3 of us that did plane table mapping of Tikal, Guatemala when I was 21. I know the things that the Mayans did, which might seem crude to us, it's very hard to replicate. It's very hard to do again. Very, very hard. And you have to learn how to do it. And that process of learning is interesting. Sometimes the process of learning something is so difficult, the system of apprenticing to somebody, apprentice to the shoemaker, that all you do for your whole life is learn how to make shoes. And that wasn't satisfactory to me. I don't do anything well because I didn't want to spend my whole life doing one thing. You are, and eventually are working on a pathway to become expert at something, do something really well, be recognized for it and sell it. I mean, and sell your talents to do something. You'll go in with a curriculum vitae and you'll say, I've done these things. I want to be hired to be a rip and read in some channel and then do my own program or something, whatever I'm not saying what you, but you will sell your expertise, right? I don't have any clients. Nobody asks me to do anything, but in order to get something done, what I sell is my ignorance. I don't know anything about medicine. I don't know anything about diagnostic tests. And I don't think you do either. And I don't think your top doctor can explain it to me or you. I'd like to do a book on diagnostic tests for men and one on diagnostic tests for women. And then eventually an understanding healthcare book, but not use any doctors because they can't tell me. And I want to take my ignorance to lead that if it becomes understandable to me, it'll be understandable to others. So I'm going to sell you my ignorance. That's a hard sell, but I've done it.
What do you think makes a difference in your mind from stumbling on an idea and choosing to actually turn it into a book or a business or a project versus just, oh, that's an interesting thought?
I've said names to you, places to you, et cetera to you. If you were said them to me and I did not understand a name or a place or anything you said, I would have stopped you. And I'll say, just a minute, and I'll look it up, or tell me what that is. I wouldn't ask to tell me, I've got to be embarrassed. I would say, just a minute, I would look it up. I don't let things go past that interest me enough to want to know about them and just go on and the world. So I don't anything. And then I see, well, that connects to that, and that connects to that. And then I have an epiphany. It doesn't happen every minute of every day. But when the couple epiphanies work together, I do it. I have in my drawers, not more than a half a dozen, but probably a half a dozen fully done books that I learned everything I could by doing the project. I didn't bother publishing them because I'm not doing them for you. And I'm certainly not doing them. I don't have a publisher. I don't have an agent. I don't have a PR person. I don't sell my books in bookstores. So I'm not doing them for anybody but myself. I did the TED conference. The speakers were not suggested by the audience. And I didn't get them there because I thought the audience would like them. I didn't give a flying anything about the audience. I just wanted to do good work and I wanted to learn from it. I had people there that I wanted to hear from, that I either knew or didn't know, or didn't have enough time to be in their presence. It was about me and about connections and of having a life dedicated to those connections and those epiphanies. And other people thought there was some things were interesting enough to come because I exposed them to a world they didn't know. Well, they don't know much of any world because my father did one thing. He made cigars. He was interested. He knew about growing tobacco, curing tobacco, making cigars, boxing them and selling them. And indulging me.
Were you always, from an early age, even driven by that curiosity and fascination?
Yep. I've never been any different. There's some people, now they're dead, but there were some people 10 years ago, a couple people in particular who I was friends with in junior high school, grammar school, junior high school, high school. We lived in a slurb just north of Philly. And so we had acquaintanceships and friendships for, 10 years, 12 years going through school. And they weren't friendly particularly with each other. And I remember within a space of 6 months, I saw both of them and had similar conversations. And they both came up with words like, because we talked about old friends and who they knew, who we knew. And, you always look in the rearview mirror when you meet old friends. They both said the same thing about me. They said, not the exact same words, but the same thing, that the difference between ourselves and the friends we know and you from when we first met in grammar school, first grade, second grade, whatever, was that you haven't changed at all. And we've changed. So that answers your question. I don't remember changing.
Do you think you're more different now from how you were in your 40s or how you were in your 20s?
No, I'm just same person. Look at the books I did then and look at the books now. They're always just my interest. I've never had anybody ask me to do one of my 100 books. I've never had anybody ask me to do a conference. I have no clients. I have not gotten a paycheck in, I say 40 years. I don't know. It could be 38 years or 45 years or 60 years. That's not my life. And I don't try to extend certainly for the last, I can clearly say in the last 30 years, nobody's ever asked me to do anything. Haven't asked me to do a book on any subject. Obviously, I know how to do books. I've done books. I had some New York Times best-selling books, Information Anxiety, and Information Anxiety 2, and they've been translated into Japanese and all around the world. Certainly have been visible because the TED conferences were visible. I did that for 18 years. So I also did the TED Med conference and the first Federal Design Assembly and the AIA National Conference, American Institute of Architects Conference, 5,000 people came. So I've been around, but not with any PR, and haven't done anything to get a gig to talk. I don't call somebody up and say, please give me an honorary doctorate. Please give me a speech. I want to speak at your school. I want to do a speech for you. You called me. I didn't call you. I'll have 2 other podcasts in the next week. I do these because it helps me solve my puzzle. It's doubtful whether our paths will cross again. So it's not the extension of my pattern of life. I don't go to dinner parties. I don't go to openings. I don't go sporting events. I don't go to theater, and I don't go to the movies. I travel with my wife and sometimes kids. We get together. I have 6 grandchildren, and we see them basically a couple of them during the year. And then we all 15 of us get together with some grandchildren and some significant others. Someplace for 3 days at Thanksgiving, someplace. This year we'll go to Charleston. Last year we went to Amelia Island. Sometimes we've gone to Mexico. We've gone to a funny blizzard snowed in ghost town once. All of this. But I guess my life is fairly boring because I don't have a planned day. I just do what I want. I, for a while, very sort of seriously painted here at home, and then some museum, the Carl Gables Museum, in Coral Gables, which is a town next to Miami. Took the whole museum, gave me the whole museum. And I had, as I said earlier, 47 of my paintings and 25 of my bronzes. And the only reason the bronze happened is that COVID made my bronze happening. The painting I could do, but then I couldn't get them framed because of COVID. I didn't leave the house kind of, but I could get deliveries of plasticine. So I could get plasticine and then I could have them delivered to a bronze caster, to a place that could cast them in bronze. So I stopped doing painting and I started doing bronzes. Then I just stopped doing my bronzes. They're very expensive to do and very expensive to cast. I love doing them. And I did my first sculpture ever in my whole life. And then I cast it in bronze, the very first one. And I thought, wow, that's really fun. And I learned something new. And the last 6 were pretty good. And so I stopped doing them because I'm not going to be a great sculptor. And I learned how to do it and I please myself. I have every one I've done. I don't give them away. I don't sell them. I just have them. And then I closed down that, got rid of all my tools, all my clay, and I'll do something else. And something else will be what I'm starting on now. I can handle, not happily, but I handle the dead periods when I don't have an intense desire to do a few projects at once. But I'm doing several books now. I work on several things at once. And I watch a lot of television. I watch lots of documentaries. I like my iPhone, and I look at Facebook a lot. Facebook has, of course, 95% shit, but 5% things I don't know that I can see some little things and connections to things. So I follow up that trail. And then I make cold calls to people's names who come up in conversation. Somebody will mention somebody. I just had a talk with this person, and they were interesting. Oh, what's his name? I'll give him a cold call. I'll say, my name's Richard Saul Wurman. You might or might not know about me. You can Google me. I would like to have an hour conversation with me. If you like it, call me back. And so I have, with perfect strangers I've never met yet, since COVID, I have a series of people I talk to. Small particle physics person in Austin, Texas, a head of geriatric psychiatry at some big hospital, just a publisher in New York I've always wanted to meet but never met, still haven't met. Just different people. I'm trying to understand the science of Zoom, of remote conversation where you're not in somebody's presence like you are in a conference. And what can you do to make that conversation where there's no agenda and there's no ask? I can't ask and they can't ask me for anything. That's my only rules. I can't ask the geriatric psychiatrist for any help. He can ask me for help. But if you represent some field or something, it's not about that setup. So that's interesting. So that's my life. It's not a planned life. It's just a life. And I've been allowed to survive. An interesting life. I have a very interesting life. I mean, for me, it's really quite interesting.
What's the most interesting documentary you've ever watched?
Oh, Jesus, that's hard to say what the most interesting one is. I don't know. There's so many that are at one level because they're all showing me something I don't know. I mean, there's a whole flock of just eye candy videos, the Attenborough type of animal life and earth life and nature that are just all the same in a way. Every one is the same. It's just eye candy. I can't say that I like the white Himalaya tiger better than I like a sea slug that just moves along. They're all just fascinating. So there's that whole group. Then there's a group of science ones that try to explain certain science premises. Most of them are not good, but every once in a while there's one that they say something or they produce an image of something that clarifies relativity or that clarifies something. I like watching the rare documentaries that are not so old because they're of real things when they could take photographs of the Hindenburg crashing and then the stories about why it crashed. And then I like watching each of the 5 different, there's probably 5 at least, other Hindenburg films that all give a different reason for the crash. Right? and they're all sure of themselves. I like the surety that people express, the pseudoscientific surety that they express about why the Mayans, their theory, which they don't say is a theory, they say is the truth, of why the Mayans disappeared, or why the Aztecs disappeared, or why somebody won a war, or what the statistics are. And they're all wrong. Right? And then the new thing, because they can't all be right, because they're all radically different. And so you have to make a judgment about between whether you're being swayed by how good a salesman the person is, or how good the facts are. And sometimes it seems like the more factual things aren't presented as good, so you buy into the lie because it's more entertaining for a while. And I'm always looking at that, how presentation affects what you think is correct. So that's how I look at things. I look at things always in the same way. I don't look at them for entertainment. I look at them to see the threads of what they take through. And then there's sometimes they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, because I do. About something, just minor things. But the fact that minor things factually are wrong and they're left to be made into a film, to be edited, proofread, studied, paid for, put online, seen by people, and there's a fact that's just wrong that they could have corrected easily, not one that's obtuse, not something that is esoteric, but just simple. It's simply wrong as well as we know today, right? The sloppiness of our world surprises me. It's all a learning experience.
Richard, this has been a learning experience in itself. It's been an absolute treat speaking with you and learning from you. I should call you Wurman, not Richard, but you've alluded to that you've got 90 books and counting probably. And I think for anybody who's interested in your work, it's very exciting, but also almost daunting because there's so many different ones. You just want to know where to start. So I'm wondering, where do you think is the best beginning place for somebody who's never read one of your works before?
There are 3 books. I would just say 2 books. Information Anxiety 2. These might be out of print, but you can get them all online, used. Get used ones. And they're not in bookstores. So Information Anxiety 2, done a long time ago, probably 20, 30 years ago. It was prophetic. It was okay. A big fat book I did called Understanding is my buddies and how they go about understanding things. And it tells about some things about me, but lots about a lot of other people. It's a big fat book. You don't want to buy it new if you can. It's expensive. It's hard to find, but it just came out a little while ago. But I don't try to sell them. You can't. It's harder to get. It's called Understanding. There's a book I did a little while ago, which is sort of a funny, skinny, and you still can get it because I saw you can get it online. Used ones called 33, the numbers 33. 33 by Richard Saul Wurman. Well, those 3 would be interesting as an overview. 33 is 33 stories with some illustrations that are grouped around another book I did in 1976. So I took a little book I did in 1976 and opened it, every spread, and then I wrote things around that open page. And then 33 were 33 ideas that come to mind when I read this old book from 1976 that I did. So when you turn the page in 33, you turn the page in this too. And it's a clever little book. I just did. That's an easy one. You see the squirrely way my head works. Best-selling book was Information Anxiety, that put me on the map because it was prophetic about what was happening in information in the early 80s, I guess. I think it was now. And then this last one, Understanding, I just did a few years ago. And that's a big, heavy book, but it's sort of a book about everything and a book about nothing. And if you had it in a bookstore, they wouldn't know what shelf to put it on. But it's okay. Amazon sold it. Fine. There's an easy way of doing it. If you go on, or one of my websites, look for the Architect of Ideas. The Architect of Ideas is an 11-minute film that was done by the Nantucket Project, some very good conference. And I didn't even know about it. They came to my house and shot this film in the summer. And then they asked me to speak. And as I got up on stage, they said, "Oh, sit in your seat for a few minutes. We have something to show you." They showed me the film. I'd never seen it. So the first time I saw it with 400 other people. I'd never seen rushes of it. And it's an interesting little film. The Architect of Ideas. And it was done by Tommy Scott. Tommy Scott, I don't know if you ever heard the story of Tom and Tom, who did Nantucket Nectars and sold it for a lot of money when they were young. And it was the first young kids from Brown who started something, servicing boats in Nantucket Harbor, then doing fruit juices and then doing it and then selling it to somebody like Snapple or something for like $75 million before people made money like that who were kids. It was before, today is a long time ago. They became famous as Tom and Tom. And he runs a conference, Tom Scott, one of the Toms, in Nantucket. And we're friends. We talk to each other. Anyway, he asked me to speak and they came and did a film, a documentary film. That's pretty good. It used to be shown on JetBlue. They used to show it all the time.
The Architect of Ideas that you mentioned, after we had our intro call, you recommended I watch it, and I watched and absolutely loved it. You can find that at wurman.com/media, WURMAN.com/media. So it's absolute.
You did? You've seen
really
it already.
Well done. Yeah, absolutely well done. But for the listeners, that's where you can find it.
But there was no script for that. He just came into my house, came into my studio, which was the little door, the horse place that I pasted on a not the mansion that I lived in, but just out there. He came in with his camera and said, "What is all this?" And he said, "Just start talking." And then we walked around my property, never went in, just walked around my property to the back and around. The last scene is me like this in front of my huge swimming pool, 93-foot swimming pool I built. And my 3 dogs, he just did it with no script. It was amazing. There was no second takes on anything.
I noticed there was a lot of external shots, but it's absolutely beautiful and really well done. Richard, if you could leave our audience with one thing to ponder about, could be anything in the world, what would it be?
Go through 3 days and not lie. And ask no questions that are like, "So how's it going? How you doing?" Don't ask questions that can't be answered. I got somebody last night. My wife and I went to someplace because they had done a whole series of stories on her. She's a novelist. She was on the cover of their magazine and they were having their 5th anniversary. So I just got inside the front door of this place and there was somebody standing there. So I started talking to him. And well, everything he was asking were questions or things that I don't think he really wanted to have answered. And then I have just a couple days before, my week is taken up sometimes by things like this. I'm annoying. I got a letter. I have more than $1.50 invested with a large wealth management company. And the senior vice president sent out a letter to all his customers, I guess. And the first sentence it was a little one-letter thing. It was like, "Could we, help us?" The way airlines, how did we do? How did we do in your flight? Or hotel. How are we as a resort? They get them and then they throw them away like that, throw them in the trash. And this was from as I said, I have more than $1.50 was in, not trivial amount. And the letter was, "We just want to know how we're doing. How are we doing for you?" Now you cannot answer that question in a letter, in a form letter. You cannot answer that question if I don't know who he is really, what kind of person he is, how old he is, I can't talk to him in a letter. I can't fill out a form. He doesn't know me. He knows me by the amount of money I have in his wealth management program, but he doesn't know me. I'm sure he didn't research me. And I just lashed into him with how insulting the letter was. I said, I suggested he get another job. So that's what I would tell your listeners. Really, it's not, I'm not saying something complicated. I'm not saying something trivial. I'm asking the dumbest questions you could ask. What dumber question could you, what more, you just ask for clarification. You make the complex clear. Just, if somebody asks you a question, is that a question you really can answer? Is it one the person really wants to know the answer to? If you ask somebody a question, ask a question bounded enough that gives you an answer, that the answer then leads to another question or another subject. And don't let somebody talk to you and say things you don't understand and not stop them. Even if they are your superior, you're not showing how stupid you are. You're showing how interested you are. The opposite. People don't want to show their ignorance. My God, that's the best thing we have going for us. If you don't have ignorance, you have nothing to fill up. It's like going into a candy store without a bag. But that is not the way the world is. Nobody wants to fail in front of anybody else. This was brought up to me. I didn't think it was anything odd. I was giving a speech at a conference with a very important friend of mine who they had a hard time getting there. He came because he was going to talk to me. It was an hour-long conversation. And it was just us conversing. We had no agenda. We didn't talk about what we were going to talk about, right? So the head of the conference obviously was a little concerned because he had no input to what we were doing, right? We had no slides. We were just sitting there saying hello to each other and talking. It was going really well. And somebody, he was in the back telling me the hour was up. I said, well, I've been told that the hour is up. And thank you, because I really got to pee. And I wear diapers so I could pee in them, but I'd rather not. So thanks to everybody. Goodbye. And I walked out. Now, that's not what you're supposed to do in society. Tell the truth. I was just telling the truth. There's nothing, everybody pees. What's bad about telling the truth about that? And in fact, I was thanking him for it. Well, let's just say, peeing actually makes you feel good. When you pee, it feels good. It's not a bad feeling. So I'm not going to hurt myself. I'm not going to be punished or do self-flagellation. But you can't talk about certain things that are controversial. But you see the point I'm making. I'm telling you an extreme case of it. But I'm not embarrassed by that at all because it's the truth. I don't get embarrassed by the truth. Let me give you another example of the truth being embarrassing. Let's say you were sitting here now and you had a booger in your nose.
We don't want to reveal too much here.
No, let's just say you had it. And we had a whole conversation and I didn't say up front, hey, you got a booger in your nose, get it out of there, because that's all I'm going to look at. I'm doing you a favor because everybody else looking at you is looking at the booger and won't say it. You see the difference? I am not embarrassing you. I'm helping you. And I'm telling you that because of that, it'll interfere with the conversation.
This has been officially the best answer I've ever heard to how you doing today. So we've come full circle here. I really, really appreciate everything. And also, I have to say that, Richard, I think I can now officially call you my favorite brain in a jar. So thanks so much for all you do and for spending the time. This is really special.
I have one question to ask you.
Of course.
What was your fantasy of not your fantasy, your preconception of what the conversation would be like? Am I different than what you saw on a film? Am I different than what you've read about? Am I different than what anybody's told you about? Is it anything like, or how is it different than what your preconception was? Because we have preconceptions of things, whether you think you do or not.
I think when I first came across your name online and learned, about TED and your books and everything, I had a preconception before speaking with you of how this conversation might be more about TED and your books and curiosity and projects and that sort of thing. But then once we spoke and once I prepared for this interview by listening to you on some other interviews you've done, I had a pretty good idea that I should just scrap however I would normally prepare for an interview and just see where this conversation goes. And I think there's no way to fully predict it, but this has been very unique compared to other interviews that I've done, and I think it's going to be one of the...
I have to stop you.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as very unique. Either something is unique or not. It can't be more unique than unique, so it can't be very unique.
That's true.
You can't use another word with unique. That's a lesson in listening to every word, but in your head, thinking about every word you're going to say.
That's very true. No, I'm just kidding. Couldn't resist there. Is there anything else that you wish to share, or are you at peace with this?
I have no idea who I'm talking to, and if anybody wants to get in touch with me, you can give them my email address or so, and they can send me an email if they like. It's very easy. rsw@Wurman, WURMAN.com. I'm not saying I'm going to answer you, or I'll just get rid of it. But there might be something that's interesting or useful. And I'm not selling you anything. I have nothing I'm selling. I don't have a podcast. You don't have to sign up for anything with me, period. So it's not that. I'm not trying to get you to write. But if one person writes me and it's interesting, it's probably good for both of us.
Wow. Richard, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for sharing your brilliant brain in a jar with us. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite app and tell a friend about the podcast. And go check out one of Richard's just a few books with them. You can also find us on Good Pods, where there are good podcasts and podcast recommendations. And for any help with podcast production, you can learn more at maxpodcasting.com. And sign up for the Podcasting to the Max newsletter. That's at maxpodcasting.com/newsletter. Until next time, let your business run wild. Bring on the bongos!